Hello, this is Charles Brewer, President of the Civil War Study Group here at Lake of the Woods, Virginia. Welcome to the recording of our program on November 17th, 2023. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for coming out on this beautiful sunny day. You could be home blowing leaves into piles, but yet here you are. That speaks well to your interest in history, and I don't think, I know that you will not be disappointed in this morning's program. For those of you who have not received recently emails from us and you had previously given us your email, maybe your email has changed, whatever, or if you have never been on our email list and wish to get on our email list, we don't send out that many. Please fill out a line on this form. It'll be on this table over here. Also on this table over here will be a few of these trifolds which describe the various historical markers that the Civil War Study Group has been responsible for putting together and having produced and then gifting them to the association. There are a few over here. And then also we have some business cards with a scannable code, so that should you be like in the line at McDonald's and discussing Civil War stuff, you could like, hey, here's one of these. And so those will be over here. I'd like to ask the members of the board, besides myself, to stand up momentarily. Here's Craig Boggs, Tom Newbig, Greg Major, and so where is our vice president?
He's out front directing people back down.
What a guy! Jack Fend is here. So these are the people that you should approach if you have any ideas or any complaints, but mostly ideas that, like, for speakers. So if you had known Pete, our speaker today, and he had never spoken here before, you could have said, hey, I've got this guy. Give us some ideas. It always helps. Now, I have to say that we've been lucky in that I can say at this point in time that I think that all of our scheduled meetings for next year are covered. And we do have a list of the programs in the programs menu choice on our website. And you'll note on that May 3rd is going to be our annual dinner. This is the first time that we've gotten it that close to the actual Battle of the Wilderness. Next year will be the 160th anniversary of the Battle of the Wilderness. So please mark your calendars accordingly. As in the past, there is no meeting in December, so take the month off. The board will be meeting, but you can take the month off. But remember to come back to us on our programs will begin on January 26th with the return of historian Kevin Pollack, whose topic will be the heaviest blow yet to the Confederacy, the Emancipation Proclamation changes the Civil War. Should be an interesting topic. Followed in February by a speech by moi on a demographic profile of the U.S. colored troops at the Battle of the Wilderness. And then also others. So our speaker today is known to many of you. For those unfamiliar, let me introduce you. Dr. Peter G. Rainey was born in Illinois, the land of Lincoln, but his family tree has branches in the South as well, as there is at least one Confederate general there. Or it is a general, right? Or a high-ranking Confederate officer. So if I got that wrong, my apologies. Anyway, so Pete is an engineering graduate of Rensselaer, had a 20-year career in the U.S. Navy. Then he spent, I don't know how many years at the CIA, and then he had a consultancy of his own. He and his wife, Kathy, moved to Lake of the Woods in 1997. Pete was active in the association. He served on the board and also as treasurer, at least on one occasion. Plus, their residency in Low was a natural because Pete is 9 generations removed by Lieutenant Governor Alexander Spotswood, who many of you would be familiar with. And in any event, so in addition to being involved in the governance of Lake of the Woods, he's heavily involved in local history. His books include Germanna Road, which is a well-researched volume on this area of Orange County and speaks in detail to the creation of Lake of the Woods. So you can get this historical connection with, especially if you're in certain sections of Lake of the Woods, you can say, hey, that was near me. Finding Culpeper Mine Road, it's a history behind the local roads used by Union forces during portions of the Battle of the Wilderness. And Gordon's Flank Attack, it's a volume centered mostly on recollections of participants on both sides in the pivotal battle, Gordon's Flank Attack, which is a pivotal battle at the end of the Battle of the Wilderness. And while those are impressive contributions, we on the board think his most important contribution is getting a group of people together about a dozen or more years ago and forming what has since been known as the Civil War Study Group. So I'd ask quickly if you would place your phones on silence so that even text dinging is not heard. So without further ado, I give the rostrum to Monsieur Pete.
Andrew, in the back row, hear me?
Yes.
All right. Ancestry is always significant in that it's never exactly true. I grew up knowing that my great-grandfather had his leg shot off at Bull Run. He was in the 38th Virginia. Not a general, more like a private driving a wagon. But in terms, ends up when I did some research, when he moved to Illinois after the war, he was the last male to leave the Rainey farm down in southern Virginia. He married the mill keeper, the most wealthy man in town, 16-year-old daughter. He was well into his late 40s at the time. Turns out that his father-in-law had his leg shot off in the Mexican War serving under Lee. And the only thing they had in common, they both worked under Lee. So that's that story. November is the Mine Run month. It drags on near to Christmas time before it ends. And I'm going to talk about just the last day or two. And the reason I'm going to talk about it, it illustrates an awful lot of things and uses a lot of words that we hear today in terms of rebellion, insurrection, the lack of habeas corpus, and the famous words that I've ran across many, many times, wanton destruction. We have two versions of this history. We have the northern version, which is only thing I could find other than what's recorded by the Army, the actual orders and that boring stuff. There was one newspaper account, and I'll show you the entire account. It doesn't take more than one slide to show the whole thing. And the Richmond paper. There was a lot in the Richmond paper. In addition to what was in the Richmond paper, there was a lot written by General Ewell, and there was a little bit written, but very strongly written by Lee. This is the northern version. They have this picture of the troops, and they all got their heads bowed down and they look very grim, marching up the hill on the Culpeper side of the Rapidan. And they are returning from Mine Run. And the only text there in the entire newspaper says, the center cut, page 13, shows the passage at Germanna Ford of our return from this expedition. It was not a return from an expedition. It was a retreat. A very disorderly, nasty retreat. And there's no mention in Harper's Weekly about what they did to Orange County in general, and Lake of Woods area in particular, as they retreated. The Richmond version, bottom line is, the Yankees during their occupancy of this side reenacted the scenes of last December at Fredericksburg. Fredericksburg was when the Union Army had crossed the river and just ransacked the entire town, which at that time was obviously just a couple of streets. But they went through and took everything they could possibly take back. Talk about Eli Fords, they subjected the unfortunate farmers within their lines to the most inhumane treatment. So we'll talk about what happened and why. First, I'll talk about the paths they followed through Orange County. Who lived on those paths? We're fortunate enough that we have a map that identifies who the farmers were that were here, what families lived here. Because you can then couple their name through the newspapers and through the official Confederate military papers to what happened to them. Okay. The acts applied along the paths to the landowners. General Lee's report of wanton destruction. The summary of all the official reports. Once I saw these words, I got really intrigued. History is basically a collection of stories, and the story is basically, it's a collection of words. And some words are very powerful. When I read wanton destruction, I had this image of terror, of leaving nothing behind, of what we see every day on the TV is going on. So I went into the books, and I'll explain how I did that, and looked up every time wanton destruction was used and how it was applied. And we'll also talk about the rebellion and acts of insurrection of 1907 and the acts of confiscation of 61 and 62. A great deal of the damage done, both financially and psychologically, was legislated. It was approved law. There were also laws that limited what could be done, and we'll discuss those too. All right. In Meade's report of the battle, he has a map. Now, this is not usual. Most of the battle reports at the general level are just a little bit of text, and then they attach all of the division reports and all the regiment reports and that sort of stuff. But in this one, he left a map. And then, this is the map that shows the 2nd and 3rd Corps retreating, and what they're doing is going right through Lake of the Woods. They come up 20, go across Lake of the Woods, go down 3. And they also came up 20 and went into what is Vaucluse Road now. Lots of maps. The one I use is the one that was done by Lieutenant Izard in '63, because it shows all of the homeowners. This is Spotswood. Over here is Willis on the golf course. Roach is down here. That one burned down after Lake of Woods was formed, but it's still a little park area. All right, Lee's report. The highlights of Lee's report are: I cannot conclude without alluding to the wanton destruction of the property of citizens by the enemy. This is not destruction of military officers' homes. This is destruction of common farmers, common citizens who are not engaged in the battle. I have never witnessed such disregard for the usages of civilized warfare and the dictates of humanity. The contrast is very evident between Gentleman Lee's version of what warfare is and the Union approved tactics, authorized from Lincoln on down. By this time, the war was total economic warfare. It wasn't just one guy in gray and one guy in blue shooting at each other. It was everything possible to destroy the economy of the South and get this war over with and get on with the next election. Here's his complete report. Houses are torn down. Furniture and farming implements destroyed, broken. Families, most of them in humble circumstances, stripped of all they possessed and left without shelter and without food. I have never witnessed any previous occasion such entire disregard for the usages of civilized warfare and the dictates of humanity. All right, the power of words, their influence on history. We are fortunate to have 40 volumes funded by Congress, basically around the 25th anniversary of Gettysburg, where they had been collecting stuff and had it at the Army base at Carlisle, and went on and collected for many years later everything they could find in terms of official orders, official reports of the battle, any correspondence by anyone in either army. And I found 31 matches and 103 records of wanton, 73 matches and 43 records of wanton destruction, and Jubal Early, mention of wanton barbarity. And I'll give you the whole Jubal Early report. It's very short, but the man's a poet. I mean, his writing is phenomenal. All right. Now, I was able to do that because all 40 volumes are on the internet, Cornell University project, and I do a simple word search. Click, click, and you got it all. You go in those 40 volumes, do you want to search anything Lee did? Do you want to search anything Grant did? Anything any of your ancestors did to see if they're in there? Click, click, and you get it all. All right. Of all those mentions, these are the types of wanton destruction that were mentioned. The benign one is Confederate troops foraging on southern farms. Totally benign. Federal troops destroying the military stores. This is the train station at Warrenton, which was the stop of the Union control of the railroad. So where they transferred everything from the railroad cars into the wagons, and the wagons came down through Fauquier, Culpeper, and into Orange County. They didn't have enough wagons. They had enough wagons, single line, from DC to Richmond, hundreds, thousands of them. But they didn't have enough, because the trains could carry an awful lot of material. So, when the Union Army left Warrenton, they left enough soldiers behind to unload those boxcars and blow it all up. Because once the Union Army moved out of a county, the county militia was all Confederate. And they did not want to leave supplies for that county militia. Moving on. Oops, sorry. Wrong button. Confederate troops' treatment of Unionists. When Virginia left the Union, there were a large population of people from the north, especially New York and New Jersey. Orange County income, as far as money leaving the county going elsewhere, was principally mining, and principally gold mining. Most of the farmers had a little gold mine on their property. There are also some major gold mines that had bought up a lot of property. They left behind a few people, and I'll mention a couple of them, that were responsible for managing those assets even though they weren't being worked anymore. They were there just to keep an eye on things. And they were not mistreated, they were not in any jeopardy. Federal troops foraging in southern farms. They had a different attitude than the Confederates did. The Confederate attitude, I'll explain in the next few graphs or so, was essentially to leave a promise that we will settle up later. The federal troops had a different attitude. They took what they needed. Now we get into the area of economic warfare. Taking the slaves. And the word is taking, not letting the slaves go free. And I'll talk a little more about that too. As long as the battle is being waged, and before the battle, some of the slaves do escape. But the majority of the slaves leave once the Union occupy a particular farm that they're on. The Federal Army more or less takes care of them for a while before they let them travel north. The slaves at that time were 50% of the economy of Virginia. They were 50% of the tax base of Virginia. And taking the slaves destroyed the economy. Because they did not hold the land. I mean, you saw the first picture, they definitely retreated and left. But they left with essentially half the tax base and much less than half of the taxpayers still around. Then we get to some serious things like burning homes. It was selective, it wasn't general. It wasn't Atlanta, it wasn't Richmond, however those fires started. But it was very selective burning of homes. And last, there was entering of homes, which was a euphemism for rape. Both sides had this policy. Punishment for rape is death. Was it effective? I don't know. However, for foraging, receipts to be given payable at termination of the war on proof of loyalty. Just as an aside, Jubal Earl never did sign loyalty. He got the hell out of the U.S. and stayed out for a while, and then he came back in, but never signed a proof of loyalty. This is an example of one federal officer's rebuttal of the Confederate news articles. He claimed no expedition was ever conducted with less improper conduct than this one, so hotly denounced by the rebel newspapers. Rape nor brutal conduct of any kind can be truthfully charged against my command. However, this was his attitude. Mules, horses, foraging provisions were taken wherever found or needed. Didn't say found and needed. Although this may be oppressive to the people for whom they were taken, they were quite beneficial to my troops. And their needs were anything they found. And they took everything they found. And this is Jubal Early. On arriving at Spotswoods, I ascertained that the enemy's whole force had passed with the exception of stragglers. Helpless women plundered of every mouthful of provisions. Not just every cow or chicken found, every mouthful of provisions. And a number of other outrages. And this describes the entire Mine Run campaign. A cowardly foe, stung with mortification at this ridiculous termination of so pretentious an expedition. What a poet. All right, now we'll get into the legal matters, rebellion and insurrection. Rebellion shows up in the Constitution. And this is where the writ of habeas corpus is suspended. What that means and what they do is they will take a citizen, or previously a citizen, who is now considered in rebellion because his state succeeded, and they will decide to go put him in prison. And I'll give you a couple examples. There's no judicial process. It's all done by the military. The Insurrection Act of 1807, 2 years before Abe was born. Whenever the president considers that unlawful obstructions or rebellions against the authority of the United States make it impractical to enforce the laws of the United States in any state. So if you have succeeded, you have by definition made it impossible for the federal government to enter that state and enforce the federal laws. So the president then may call into service such of the militia of any state. And I believe I remember early on, he called up the Pennsylvania militia and asked them to move over to Maryland and take over the Maryland capital. Right? Wrong? Anybody wrong? So he may call the federal service of any state, and they enforce those laws or suppress the rebellion. So there was a very small U.S. Army. The majority of the people who were fighting in 61, 62 were in fact pulled up from the various other state militias. And the majority of people who were serving here at the Battle of the Wilderness, about half of them on the Union side were state militias. And to digress a little, part of the reason for Gordon's success on his flank attack is many of these men in the militia had never been shot at. And the first time they heard shots coming their way, they ran, and they ran back to Route 3. Okay, acts of confiscation. Property used for insurrectionary purposes can be lawfully subject to prize and capture. Prize and capture is an old nautical law term. It goes back to the British, I don't know how many centuries. But back in those days, one of the queen's or king's ship, if they were at war with another country, like England was at war with France, and they took a French ship, they could clean out that ship of any treasure that's on there and distribute it to the crew. Captain, of course, taking most of it. Congress made it the duty of the president to have such prized property seized, confiscated, and condemned. Condemns a euphemism for burn it down. To ensure a speedy termination of the present rebellion, it should be the duty of the President of the United States to cause the seizure of all the estates of any person who ever assists and gives aid and cover to such a rebellion. The types of aid were, if you had taken in a wounded Confederate soldier, especially a relative, especially if it was one of your children, and the Union Army was in possession of your farm, they would take your child and you, and they would take the wounded child and put him into a Union hospital for a while, and they would take you and put you in prison, outside of Virginia. So let's look at who got injured in this so-called retreat. First thing we look at are the farms. And Skinner's farm was up near the river, up near the Germanic College, or what is now the golf course up there. Willis Farm is on the Meadow Farms, what used to be the Meadow Farms golf course. Grimes is across Route 3 on Vaucluse Road. This is the Grimes sisters. And Lacey, we know, is in the park. They broke up the furniture of the houses and took all of the clothing and bed linen of every house. Lacey had his mill burnt, his house ransacked, every book in his fine library carried off. So that's confiscation of basic needs. Property was condemned. They burnt the house of Mr. Reuben Gordon, whose father had been a general, I guess, in the Mexican War. He was an original successionist and did not leave a thing of any value whatever on the place. So they took everything out, ransacked it completely, and then burned it to the ground. They took 2 civilians, arrested both of them. Mr. John Spotswood, who was living at Spotswood Park. He was a magistrate, which is sort of like an appointed judge. And Captain Beale, although he was not an active in the military at the time, but he was the postmaster for the area. So they were taken, leaving their families without provision or service. Spotswood ended up in prison in Delaware. He was released a few months later and had to walk home from Delaware as a 60-some-year-old man. Economic warfare. There was a tan yard. There was very little industry in this end of Orange County, or any part of Orange County. But there was a tan yard down south on Route 20. Heiser stoves, the buildings burnt, machinery destroyed. And here's Jubal Early again, his report of what happened to the tavern. Locust Grove used to be an intersection of 522 and 20. Used solely for the purpose of tanning hides to furnish shoes to the women and children, not even claiming that is any part of supply to the war. Burnt, the hides are taken and cut in pieces. I mean, they didn't take this stuff to make shoes later. They cut it all up, and the house of the owner was burned. During the Depression, many of the university historians, high school teachers of history, and anybody who could read and write, basically, could apply to get a job to collect historic records of your local area. And this was a record of the vineyard, the tanning yard. Been in operation for about 20 years prior to the war. And they renewed it and kept it in operation after the war until 1910. And it was related that the total damage was about $10,000. Now, the Confiscation Act, all slaves who shall anyway give aid of persons who shall in any way give aid or comfort to shall be deemed captives of war and shall be forever free of their servitude and not held again as slaves. Most of the Negroes within the Yankee lines went off with them. This is from the newspaper. Houses first sacked and Negroes carried off tied. This was the first clue that it was not just as the Hollywood myth that all the slaves just run away free and go up north or wherever. In fact, the Army takes control of them the same way they took control of the cattle or anything else that they brought back. Once you're clear of the battle, then they are forever free. This is from the 1960 census, which was the last census done before the war for our area of Orange County. And these are the slave lists. I'm not going to go through and count them all, but this is like 2 dozen. This is closer to 3 dozen. This is like half a dozen. Slaves at the time were about $600 for an able-bodied man, or a childbirth age woman. So 16 slaves is about the same as tax-wise and damage-wise as burning down the tankyard. And this happens over and over and over again throughout the entire northern end, well, essentially from Mine Run all the way up to the Rapidan. Hundreds and hundreds of slaves. Question is it deliberate and targeted, or is it just undisciplined stragglers? There was something called the Liber Code from 1863, and this is the Union side. All wanton violence committed against persons in the invaded country, all destruction of property not commanded by an authorized officer, all robbery, all pillage, sacking, even after taking a place by main force, all rape, wounding, maiming, or killing such inhabitants are prohibited under the penalty of death. So that you could commit destruction of property if you were authorized. But even an officer could not authorize robbing, pillage, sacking, maiming, raping, wounding, maiming, killing. A soldier, officer, or private, in the act of committing such violence and disobeying a superior ordering him to abstain from it may be lawfully killed on the spot by such superior. I found no record in the official records that indicated that anyone was court-martialed or anyone was executed during the battle for any of these crimes. There was no massive burning of structures. The Skinner House stands today. That's over across from Germanna College area. Beale's house stands, or I think, I didn't notice it coming here, but I assume it still stands. It definitely stood a few years ago. That's down Route 3, still there. Lacey, of course, well protected, still standing. Willis, last time I saw it, it was in worse condition than this. I don't know if it's fallen down yet or not. That's on the golf course across from Flat Road. Spotswood House was sketched, and it was still standing later in 1864. It burned sometime after the war, and they moved to what was then the kitchen house. And they stayed there until the last heir sold the property. I don't know exactly when that house was taken down to make Spotswood Park, but I think it was taken down before the property was sold. All right, now we look at a couple of real Yankees. John Wyckoff was from New York. He had been hired by the mainly British mine owners. All of this was gold mine country. Culpeper mine is a very big cross mine up here. And this is a text from the official records. He's a northern miner who I have met believed to be reliable and has sent me word, signed by Meade. Essentially, Wyckoff was a useful intelligence source used by Meade and Meade's staff during the few days they were here. William Langley was a coachmaker. He was born in New York, and his wife and his daughter were living here. Nobody bothered them. I don't know exactly when they left eventually. But they went through the entire battle without any discomfort. Conclusion. Obviously a clear policy to remove the slaves. Economic warfare. Clear policy to capture civilian officials. clear that normal confiscation was exceeded. What's called foraging became total destruction of crops and removal of all livestock. I mean, it isn't a matter of they took the grain or they took the vegetables that had been picked. What hadn't been picked was trampled on, intentionally destroyed entire crops. Some homes were entered, ransacked, and very few, but some were burned. Are not found the smoking gun. There's no report of officers authorizing entering homes and any resulting destruction. There's also no report of any disciplinary action because of that. So we're left with explicit verbal directives? I don't think so. I don't think it was necessary. Normal response? Probably, combined with just a blind eye by the senior officers. Thank you. Any questions?
Just a point, you're talking about the $10,000 economic loss.
Mhm.
That's in $1863, and quick calculation says that would be close to 250, a quarter of a million today, in
Oh, yeah.
today's dollars.
Yeah, no, to replicate anything like that would be near, at least that. Any other questions in the back?
I have a question about Payne's Farm. Is there any record of the destruction that happened at that site?
Well, we have the record of the colonel or lieutenant colonel being killed at that site. I think it's still hanging up in the front, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. But I don't know of, I don't know about the farm itself. I'm pretty sure it was still there after the war. Any other questions? Yeah.
I may be P&G'd from this, but as a northerner, weren't there similar reports of Confederate troops doing the same thing throughout whenever they tried to invade the northern territories? And Sherman, during the March to the Sea, did prosecute people who were doing things without specific orders. So it was there, and let's face it, it was an issue to destroy the economy.
Yeah.
You know, Lincoln offered to buy all slaves, pay for all slaves. I forget what, it was billions of dollars that he put on the table to not have the war. And so, and it was Jefferson, a slave owner, that did establish the Confiscation Act. You know, and that was to put down the slave rebellion. So it is a bit of propaganda to look at what Jude Burley was saying in the southern newspapers to rile people up, and that the northern newspapers just totally ignored it because it wasn't propaganda that they were trying to establish. And as a agency retiree as well, I fully understand propaganda and how to use it. And it wasn't the first time that you know, things like economic warfare took place. So,
I won't argue with that. I just wanted to show
yeah, no, I understand.
what happened here.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it's not the use of wanton destruction. You know, that's just propaganda.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yes.
I'm curious about the gold mines.
Yeah.
I mean, why were not they confiscated and maybe mined for the, federal side or, it seems like that would be an economic advantage to have the gold mines under control.
There were actually only
Well,
about
no,
2 or 3 that were actually at that time still pulling gold out.
There's no advantage to having a mine. The advantage is having the gold bars in the bank. There was no way to get the gold out of the mine during the war. they would bring in miners from Europe, and as soon as the war started, those people would go, they'd get out.
Well, the mines were pretty well played out by that time,
I
weren't they?
don't,
Weren't they mostly in the 1700s?
no, not the gold, oh no, they were,
Up until about 1840, but then there were about 2 or 3 that lasted into the 1920s.
yeah, no, they were, the good part of the Spotswood money was not in selling vegetables or raising cattle, it was mining. They had gold on their farm that they had people mine, mainly slaves. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
You mentioned a 40-volume set of records.
Right.
What is that?
That is the official records of the War of Rebellion. And it was put together by the U.S. Army, funded by the U.S. Congress after the 25th anniversary at Gettysburg, where the Union and the old Union and the old Confederate soldiers got together, and the whole attitude was about the war was changed from it didn't happen to let's get everything we can find out about it because it's important history. We don't want it ever to happen again. And it's available, and Cornell is one source, Cornell University. There's other sources.
You can share a link that you've used with me, and I'll distribute it.
Okay, yeah,
Thank you.
I'll send you that. Did it? Anybody else? So, yeah.
How long did the retreat take? Was it a matter of one day, a week?
I think more than one day, but not a week. It was a general retreat. That's why they were using so many different paths. And they were eager to leave. Okay, thank you.
Well, wait, stay right there.
All right.
Stay right there. If you'll give me the, okay, so, Pete has moved away about 6-7 years ago, on one of his return trips, like 2 or 3 years ago, he made known to me that the historic signs at Spotswood Park, you've probably seen let's see. Oops. Oh, you have more stuff here. Here we go. Oh, okay, so Spotswood Park, there's a mail kiosk right there inside the gate, and there's this medal thing to Captain John Spotswood, but also these are some remaining bricks from the chimney from Orange Grove, which was the home of Captain John Spotswood. Well, these panels have not weathered well, and we Pete and I agree that they should be replaced. It's taken me a little bit of time to find the financing, but we finally found it. And so we are going to put these up in their place. And I wanted to take this opportunity to point out that the 1865 to 1967 sign is being sponsored by Doug and Terry Vickery and my wife and myself. And this sign here, which was the early days, 1728 to 1864, is being sponsored by the Civil War Study Group in honor of the many contributions of Pete Rainey. I always try to do at least one surprise every meeting, so I'm going to have to find a way to top that one for January. But at any rate, thank you, Pete, for all that you've done, and thank you, Kathy, for letting him do all this stuff. But at any rate, so have a good Thanksgiving. Oh, yes, Tom.
I guess two things.
Oh.
On Saturday, December 9th, at Salubria, they're going to have the 160th anniversary of the Union encampment in Culpeper. And
Ah.
I think runs from 10 until 4 o'clock.
All right, okay, great.
Worth checking out. And second,
We'll put that on the website.
a lot of us have been concerned about wilderness crossing, and
No,
there are several lawsuits that have taken place. American Battlefield Trust is leading the charge on the biggest one, and I would say it was already a success in terms of Orange County reducing the height limit increase that they passed earlier this year from 80 feet back down to 45 feet.
good.
And just this past week, the Piedmont Environmental Council sued Orange County for freedom of information, especially about the non-disclosure agreements that several supervisors signed. And at the board meeting upstairs on Wednesday night, the board immediately agreed that they're going to release 4,800 pages, including the non-disclosure agreements.
Good.
These
That's
lawsuits,
good news.
with the support of people back in American Battlefield Trust and Piedmont Environmental Council, are having real effects, positive effects.
Yes, that's good news. Thank you, Tom. Okay, any other news?
Do you need help putting the chairs away?
Help is always needed. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yes, sir.
If I can just mention something, there will be a fundraiser over at Bella Cucina on Monday,
Ah,
starting at 6 o'clock. I've been doing these up north and just started doing them down here the last several months. And the group we're gonna be supporting is called Stop Soldier Suicide. And the way the fundraiser works is just come and have dinner, and Mauricio, the owner of Bella Cucina, and myself will do a 10% match of the full tab for the evening. That'll go to the organization, so.
well, I tell you what, our contact at Civil War Study Group at gmail.com, if you'll send me that information, I'll distribute it.
That'd be great, that'd
Okay.
be great, so.
Thank you.
And I'm new to this. I've been following the Civil War, or trying to follow the Civil War for a long time, and I'm sure there's been a discussion, but I live across from Ramsey Beach. What is the cemetery there? It just doesn't say what it is. I've heard it was a slave burial, but then I've heard it was, don't know?
There's a sign there.
There's a sign.
You designed it.
No, there's no
No,
sign.
no, Ramsey Beach.
No, Ramsey Beach,
Oh,
not,
Ramsey
not,
Beach.
Ramsey
Not
Beach,
Ramsey,
no,
not-
no,
not-
no,
Not Edgemont Beach.
no. No, we found the grave sites. Oh, okay. Apperson. We found the Apperson grave sites.
Right, that's over.
Okay, I mean, they used to be unmarked, nothing there at all, and the Apperson family supported that effort. The big grave site that we worked on was the Spotswood grave site. And one of the things I was able to do was to find everything we could find about who's buried there. There was a major effort done from some people that aren't with us anymore, using the ground penetration radar and all that. They're sad tale. First got here, the cemetery had typical flagstone little markers at each grave site, and it was perfectly lined up so you rise facing the sun. Someday, years after that, they mowed the grass, and the first thing they did was pick up all the slate, pile it in one big pile, then they mowed the grass. And I walked over there 2 days later and I saw that pile of slates. I cried. I mean, that was such ignorance.
no sense of history. Yes.
Yeah. But we did pretty well reconstruct the number of graves there are there. There is a site that looked like a mass grave that we speculated was Union.
But no answer to that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Yes, Bob.
Several years ago, I befriended a member of the extended Apperson family, not the Ray Appersons, but a cousin, who told me that her belief was that the people buried at Ramsey Point were roaches in all likelihood,
Huh.
that had been a roach family burial ground. I don't have any documentation, but that person told me that.
It makes sense. I mean, it was all their property. All those pine trees over there, they're new. There were no pine trees back in 1860.
Pines reclaim the ground.
Yeah.
They do. Doesn't take long.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you in January, and I'll put the information that we discussed on the website so that you can take advantage of it. Thank you. Before you go, please remember to visit our website often, civilwarstudygroup.org. We make every attempt on a regular basis to provide informative content. Thank you for visiting, and God bless.